You think you know the story of the Vietnam War, the protests, the body counts, the helicopter evacuations from Saigon. But what if I told you that while America debated its involvement in Vietnam, the CIA was fighting an even more brutal conflict just next door, a war so secret that it didn't officially exist in a country that wasn't supposed to be a battlefield? This is the story they've kept classified for over 50 years. The story of Lima Site 20A, a clandestine hospital hidden deep in the mountains of Laos, where American doctors and Hmong nurses performed miracles with nothing but courage and improvised medical supplies. Where the wounded came not in ambulances, but carried on the backs of children through jungle paths under constant bombardment. Where the Hippocratic Oath was honored in a place that officially didn't exist. But this isn't just another war story. This is the heartbreaking account of how America forged an unbreakable bond with the Hmong people, and then abandoned them to genocide when the politics changed. It's the story of Dr. Sarah Chen and Nurse Vang Pao, two women from different worlds who built something beautiful in the heart of hell, only to watch it destroyed by the very government they served. Welcome to the secret war in Laos, where heroes operated in the shadows and the price of American foreign policy was paid in Hmong blood. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about American honor, medical ethics, and the true cost of fighting wars that don't officially exist. March 15, 1968. Dr. Sarah Chen crouches in the cargo hold of an unmarked C-130 transport plane, trying to keep her medical supplies from sliding around as the aircraft banks sharply to avoid North Vietnamese anti-aircraft fire. Officially, this flight doesn't exist. The plane carries no military markings. The pilot works for a CIA front company called Air America, and the destination, a mountaintop airstrip in northern Laos, isn't on any map that the American public will ever see. According to the Geneva Accords of 1962, Laos is supposed to be neutral territory, off-limits to foreign military intervention. The reality is very different. For 7 years, the CIA has been conducting the largest covert operation in American history, recruiting an army of Hmong tribesmen to fight a proxy war against North Vietnamese forces using Laos as a supply route to South Vietnam. It's a conflict that will consume 200,000 lives and drop more bombs on this small Southeast Asian nation than were used in all of World War II. But none of this officially exists, which means that when American advisors and Hmong soldiers are wounded, they can't be treated in regular military hospitals. They can't be evacuated to facilities in Thailand or South Vietnam without risking exposure of the secret war. They need medical care that's as invisible as the conflict itself. That's where Lima Site 20A comes in. Sarah is 29 years old, a trauma surgeon who volunteered for this assignment after completing her residency at Johns Hopkins. The daughter of Chinese immigrants who fled the Communist Revolution, she grew up hearing stories about the cost of political upheaval, about families torn apart by ideological conflicts they didn't choose. When the CIA recruiter approached her, through carefully maintained plausible deniability, she saw an opportunity to use her skills to help people caught in the crossfire of another proxy war. What she didn't expect was to fall in love with the Hmong people and their impossible courage. The airstrip at Lima Site 20A is carved into the top of a mountain peak, a narrow ribbon of packed earth that requires pilots to approach at angles that would terrify commercial airline passengers. The hospital itself is built into caves and reinforced bunkers, protected from the constant bombardment that has become a fact of life in this corner of Laos. As Sarah's plane touches down, she can hear the distant rumble of artillery, North Vietnamese forces probing the defenses of the Hmong stronghold. This is a war zone in the truest sense, where medical personnel work under conditions that would challenge doctors in the most advanced trauma centers. Her guide and translator is Vang Pao, a 23-year-old Hmong woman whose English is better than that of many American college graduates. Vang Pao, not related to the famous Hmong general of the same name, learned the language from American advisors, but her real education came from 3 years of treating wounds that would challenge surgeons with decades of experience. "Welcome to our invisible hospital," Vang Pao says with a smile that doesn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "Here, we save lives that officially don't exist." The tour that follows is both inspiring and heartbreaking. The hospital has been carved out of limestone caves, with operating rooms lit by generators that run on aviation fuel smuggled in by Air America flights. The equipment is a mixture of state-of-the-art American medical technology and improvised solutions that would make MacGyver proud. In one cave, Sarah finds an X-ray machine powered by a car battery and operated by a Hmong teenager who learned radiology from a manual written in English. In another, she discovers a blood bank maintained by volunteers who donate their own blood to keep the supply fresh. The pharmacy is stocked with medications that officially don't exist, shipped through channels that leave no paper trail. But it's the patients that really drive home the reality of what she's walked into. The first case she encounters is a 12-year-old Hmong boy named Chia, who was caught in a mortar attack while carrying supplies to forward positions. His left leg is mangled beyond repair, and in a conventional hospital, amputation would be the obvious choice. But Vang Pao explains that for a Hmong child, losing a limb means losing his future. He won't be able to work in the fields, won't be able to support a family, will become a burden on a community that's already struggling to survive. We save the leg, Vang Pao says simply, or we save the boy's soul. It's Sarah's introduction to the impossible choices that define medicine in a secret war. With limited resources and no possibility of medical evacuation, every decision becomes a matter of life and death, not just for the patient, but for their entire family and community. The surgery takes 6 hours, performed in a cave lit by kerosene lamps when the generator fails. Sarah works with instruments that have been sterilized in boiling water, using techniques she learned in medical school but never expected to need in practice. Vang Pao assists with the skill of a surgeon, her hands steady despite the artillery fire that occasionally shakes dust from the cave ceiling. When they finally save the boy's leg, the celebration is muted but profound. Chia's parents, who have been waiting outside the cave for hours, fall to their knees in gratitude. Other patients and medical staff gather around, understanding that this small victory represents something larger, the triumph of healing over destruction, of hope over despair. You see why we do this, Vang Pao tells Sarah as they clean up after the surgery. Not for politics or governments, but for children like Chia, who deserve a chance to grow up whole. But Sarah is beginning to understand that the hospital exists in a moral gray area that challenges everything she learned about medical ethics. The patients include not just innocent civilians and Hmong soldiers fighting for their homeland, but also American advisors who aren't supposed to be in Laos and CIA operatives, conducting operations that violate international law. The ethical complexity becomes clear when she's asked to treat a wounded American pilot who was shot down during a bombing mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Captain Mike Rodriguez is badly burned and needs immediate surgery, but he's also carrying intelligence that could compromise ongoing operations if he falls into enemy hands. "Doc, you need to understand something," Rodriguez tells her through gritted teeth as she examines his injuries. "If the NVA captures me, they'll torture me for information about our operations. And if they find out about this hospital, they'll kill everyone here. It's a dilemma that doesn't exist in civilian medicine, the patient whose survival could endanger everyone else in the facility." Sarah finds herself weighing not just Rodriguez's medical needs, but the security implications of treating him, the risk to the Hmong staff who have become her colleagues and friends. The decision is made for her when North Vietnamese forces launch a major assault on the mountain, forcing the hospital to evacuate its most vulnerable patients to deeper caves. Rodriguez, despite his injuries, insists on joining the defense of the facility, using his knowledge of air support procedures to coordinate with American planes that officially aren't flying combat missions over Laos. The battle lasts for 3 days, during which the hospital staff continues to treat wounded, while artillery shells explode overhead. Sarah performs surgery in caves so deep that the sound of the generators echoes like thunder, operating on patients who are brought in faster than she can treat them. It's during this battle that she truly understands what Vang Pao meant about saving souls as well as bodies. The Hmong fighters aren't just defending a military position, they're protecting their families, their culture, their very existence as a people. For them, this isn't a proxy war or a geopolitical chess game. It's a fight for survival against an enemy that has promised to exterminate them if the Americans ever leave. The North Vietnamese assault is finally repelled, but the cost is devastating. Dozens of Hmong fighters are dead, the hospital's blood supply is exhausted, and several pieces of critical equipment have been destroyed by shrapnel. More importantly, The attack has demonstrated just how vulnerable Lima Site 20A really is. They know we're here now, Vang Pao tells Sarah as they survey the damage. This was just a probe. Next time, they'll come with everything they have. Sarah looks around at the caves that have become her world, at the Hmong staff who have risked everything to build something beautiful in the heart of hell, at the patients who depend on them for survival. She realizes that she's no longer just a doctor treating patients. She's become part of a community, a family forged in the crucible of an invisible war. But she's also beginning to understand that this family is living on borrowed time, that the political winds in Washington are shifting, and that the Hmong people, who have sacrificed everything for America, may soon find themselves abandoned to face their enemies alone. The secret war in Laos is about to enter its final phase, and Lima Site 20A is about to become the stage for a tragedy that will haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. June 1968. The hospital has become more than a medical facility. It's evolved into the heart of a community that exists in the shadow of an invisible war. Sarah has been at Lima Site 20A for 3 months now, long enough to understand that the relationships forged here transcend the usual boundaries between doctor and patient. American and Hmong, military and civilian. In the caves carved into the mountain, a new kind of family has formed, bound together by shared danger and the daily miracle of saving lives. The transformation is most visible in the partnership between Sarah and Vang Pao. What began as a professional relationship between an American surgeon and a Hmong translator has evolved into something deeper, a collaboration that combines Western medical training with traditional Hmong healing practices, creating treatments that neither could achieve alone. Vang Pao's knowledge extends far beyond translation. She understands the cultural context that makes the difference between successful treatment and medical failure. When Sarah wants to amputate a farmer's infected hand, Vang Pao explains that losing his dominant hand will make him unable to work, turning him into a burden on a community that can't afford to support non-productive members. Together, they develop an alternative treatment using traditional Hmong herbs combined with American antibiotics, saving both the hand and the man's place in his society. Your medicine treats the body, Vang Pao explains as they work together on a particularly difficult case. Our medicine treats the spirit. Together we treat the whole person. It's a philosophy that challenges everything Sarah learned in medical school, but she's seeing results that speak for themselves. Patients who should have died are surviving. Wounds that should have become infected are healing cleanly. The mortality rate at Lima Site 20A is lower than at many conventional hospitals, despite the primitive conditions and constant danger. But the real breakthrough comes when they start training Hmong teenagers to serve as medical assistants, creating a new generation of healers who can bridge the gap between traditional and modern medicine. The training program is Vang Pao's idea, born from the practical necessity of having more medical personnel and the deeper understanding that the Hmong people need to be able to care for themselves when the Americans inevitably leave. The students are mostly young women, chosen for their intelligence and dedication rather than their formal education. Chia Vang, the 16-year-old daughter of a village chief, becomes Sarah's star pupil. Despite having never attended formal school, she masters complex medical procedures with an intuitive understanding that amazes her American teacher. Within weeks, she's performing minor surgery under supervision, managing the pharmacy, and teaching other students the skills she's learned. She has the hands of a surgeon, Sarah tells Vang Pao as they watch Chia suture a patient's wound with perfect technique. In America, she could become anything she wanted. In America, perhaps, Vang Pao replies quietly, but we are not in America. We are in Laos, and here she must learn to heal her people with whatever tools she can find. The comment reflects a growing awareness among the Hmong staff that their partnership with the Americans is temporary. The political situation is changing rapidly. President Johnson has announced he won't seek re-election, peace talks are beginning in Paris, and there's growing pressure in Congress to end American involvement in Southeast Asia. The Hmong people understand better than their American allies what this means for their future. When the Americans leave, the North Vietnamese will come, and there will be no mercy for those who collaborated with the CIA. The hospital staff are not just treating patients, they're preparing for a future where they'll have to survive on their own. This reality becomes painfully clear when Sarah receives a visit from Colonel James Morrison, the CIA officer who oversees American operations in northern Laos. Morrison is a career intelligence officer, a man who thinks in terms of strategic objectives and acceptable losses rather than individual human lives. "Doctor, I need you to understand something," Morrison tells her during a briefing in the hospital's command cave. "This operation has an expiration date. Washington is looking for an exit strategy from Southeast Asia, and when that happens, we won't be able to maintain facilities like this one." "What about the Hmong?" Sarah asks. "What about the people who've risked everything to help us?" Morrison's expression doesn't change. "That's not my department. My job is to run effective operations while we're here. What happens afterward is a political decision made by people above my pay grade." It's Sarah's first direct confrontation with the cold calculus of intelligence work, the understanding that the Hmong people she's come to love are considered expendable assets rather than allies deserving of protection. The conversation leaves her shaken and angry, but also more determined than ever to prepare her Hmong colleagues for an uncertain future. The training program intensifies, with Sarah and Vang Pao working around the clock to transfer as much medical knowledge as possible to their Hmong students. They're not just teaching procedures, they're creating a comprehensive medical education program that can function without American support. Chia Vang emerges as the natural leader of this new generation of Hmong medics. Her combination of natural talent, fierce determination, and deep cultural knowledge makes her the perfect bridge between traditional and modern healing practices. Sarah begins to see her not just as a student, but as her successor, the person who will carry on the hospital's mission when the Americans are gone. The bond between them deepens when Chia saves Sarah's life during a particularly intense North Vietnamese bombardment. The attack comes without warning on a humid July morning, as Sarah is performing surgery on a wounded Hmong soldier. The first shells hit the mountain's defensive positions, but the bombardment quickly shifts to target the hospital itself. The North Vietnamese have clearly identified Lima Site 20A as a high-value target, and they're determined to destroy it. As explosions rock the cave system, Sarah finds herself trapped in an operating room with an unconscious patient and no way to evacuate. The cave entrance has been blocked by falling rocks, the lights have failed, and she can hear the ominous sound of the cave ceiling beginning to crack under the bombardment. Chia appears like an angel in the darkness, carrying a flashlight and a crowbar she somehow acquired. Working together, they manage to stabilize the patient and find an alternative exit through a narrow passage that connects to the main cave system. But the route requires crawling through spaces barely wide enough for a human body while carrying a wounded man who can't be moved safely. "Leave me," the patient whispers when he regains consciousness and understands the situation. "Save yourselves." "No," Chia says firmly, her voice carrying an authority that belies her 16 years. "We are healers. We do not abandon our patients." The evacuation takes 2 hours, with Chia leading the way through passages she's memorized during months of exploring the cave system. Sarah follows, helping to carry the patient, marveling at the courage and determination of this teenage girl who refuses to give up on anyone under her care. When they finally reach safety, Sarah realizes that something fundamental has changed in their relationship. Chia is no longer her student. She's her partner, her equal, her successor. The knowledge and skills have been transferred, but more importantly, the spirit of the hospital has found a new guardian. "You saved us," Sarah tells her, as they rest in the main cave, listening to the bombardment continue overhead. "We saved each other," Chia replies. "That is what families do." But even as the bonds between American and Hmong medical staff grow stronger, the political situation continues to deteriorate. Reports from Washington indicate that the new Nixon administration is looking for ways to reduce American involvement in Southeast Asia, and the secret war in Laos is increasingly seen as an expensive liability rather than a strategic asset. The writing is on the wall, and everyone at Lima Site 20A can read it. The Americans will leave, probably sooner rather than later, and when they do, the Hmong people will be left to face their enemies alone. Sarah begins to understand that her real mission isn't just to treat patients or train medical staff, it's to help prepare the people she's come to love for a future that will test everything they've learned about survival, courage, and the bonds that hold communities together in the face of overwhelming odds. The secret war is about to end, but the real tragedy is just beginning. December 1970. The end comes not with dramatic battles or heroic last stands, but with a series of bureaucratic memos and budget cuts that seal the fate of Lima Site 20A and everyone who depends on it. Sarah has been at the hospital for nearly 3 years now, long enough to see 2 generations of Hmong medical students graduate from her training program. The facility has evolved into something unprecedented, a fully functional hospital, staffed primarily by indigenous personnel, combining traditional healing practices with modern medical techniques, operating in conditions that would challenge the most advanced trauma centers. But none of that matters to the accountants in Washington who are calculating the cost of America's longest war. The first sign of the coming abandonment is the reduction in supply flights. Air America missions to Lima Site 20A, once daily occurrences, become weekly, then monthly. Medical supplies that were once abundant become precious commodities to be rationed carefully. The sophisticated equipment that made complex surgeries possible begins to break down without replacement parts. Sarah finds herself performing operations with instruments that belong in a museum, using techniques she learned from old medical textbooks rather than modern procedures. The Hmong staff adapts with their characteristic resilience, but she can see the strain in their faces as they're forced to make increasingly difficult choices about which patients can be saved and which must be allowed to die. The second sign is the withdrawal of American advisors. The CIA officers who once coordinated air support and intelligence operations disappear one by one, replaced by nobody. The radio equipment that connected Lima Site 20A to the outside world falls silent, leaving the hospital isolated in an increasingly hostile environment. Vang Pao, now 25 and serving as the hospital's head nurse, understands what's happening better than most of the American staff. She's lived through enough wars to recognize the signs of abandonment, the way allies become expendable when political priorities change. They are leaving us, she tells Sarah during one of their evening conversations in the cave that serves as the hospital's break room. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when they go, the North Vietnamese will come. Sarah wants to argue, wants to believe that America won't abandon the people who have sacrificed everything to support the secret war. But she's been receiving her own signals from Washington, subtle hints that her assignment is temporary, that the medical mission in Laos is being re-evaluated, that she should begin preparing for transition to local control. The euphemisms can't hide the brutal reality. America is cutting its losses and running, leaving the Hmong people to face genocide alone. The third sign is the most heartbreaking, the arrival of refugees from other Hmong communities that have already been overrun by North Vietnamese forces. They come in small groups, carrying horror stories of villages burned, families separated, children killed for the crime of having parents who worked with the Americans. Among the refugees is an elderly shaman named Tu Ger, who has walked for 3 weeks through enemy territory to reach Lima Site 20A. His village was one of the first to be liberated by North Vietnamese forces, and his account of what happened there chills everyone who hears it. They came at night, he tells the assembled hospital staff, his voice carrying the weight of unspeakable trauma. They said we were traitors, that we had betrayed our own people by working with the Americans. They made lists. Everyone who had helped the CIA, everyone who had learned English, everyone who had sent their children to American schools. He pauses, struggling with memories that are too painful to share, but too important to keep silent. They killed the men first, then the older boys. The women and young children they took away to camps where they would be re-educated. But some of us they kept, to make examples. They wanted the other villages to see what happens to those who trust Americans. The torture he describes is systematic, designed not just to punish, but to terrorize. The North Vietnamese are not just eliminating collaborators. They're sending a message to any Hmong who might still believe that America will protect its allies. Sarah listens to Tu Ger's testimony with growing horror, understanding that this is the future awaiting everyone at Lima Site 20A. The hospital staff, the patients, the medical students she's trained, they're all marked for death because of their association with the American mission. That night, she makes a decision that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Using the hospital's emergency radio, she contacts Colonel Morrison and requests immediate evacuation for the entire Hmong staff. It's a violation of protocol. Medical personnel aren't supposed to make political decisions. But Sarah no longer cares about regulations. She's seen what happens to America's allies when the politics change, and she refuses to be complicit in another abandonment. Morrison's response is predictably bureaucratic. "Doctor, that's not how this works. We have procedures for personnel evacuation, and they don't include local nationals who aren't American citizens. These people have risked their lives for 3 years to support American operations," Sarah argues. "They've saved the lives of American soldiers, protected American secrets, and trusted American promises. We owe them protection." "What we owe them is not my decision to make," Morrison replies coldly. "My orders are to wind down operations in an orderly fashion. That means evacuating American personnel and destroying sensitive equipment. Local nationals are not my responsibility." It's the same cold calculus that has characterized American foreign policy throughout the Cold War. Allies are useful until they become inconvenient, at which point they become expendable. Sarah realizes that she's witnessing the human cost of realpolitik, the price paid by ordinary people for the strategic decisions made by distant bureaucrats. But Vang Pao and the other Hmong staff have been listening to the radio conversation, and their response surprises Sarah with its dignity and resignation. "We knew this day would come," Vang Pao says quietly. "We hoped it would not, but we knew. The Americans always leave. It is their way." "Then come with me," Sarah pleads. "I can get you out, at least some of you. You have skills, you speak English. You could build new lives in America." Vang Pao shakes her head. "And leave our people? Leave our families? Leave the patients who depend on us? No, Dr. Chen, this is our home, our responsibility. We will stay and do what we can for as long as we can." It's a choice that embodies everything noble about the human spirit: the willingness to sacrifice personal safety for the welfare of others, the refusal to abandon those who depend on you, the determination to maintain your principles even when the world around you is falling apart. Sarah's evacuation comes on January 15, 1971, aboard one of the last Air America flights out of northern Laos. She's allowed to take only personal belongings, leaving behind 3 years of medical records, training materials, and equipment that could help the Hmong staff continue their work. The goodbye is devastating. Chia Vang, now 19 and serving as the hospital's chief medical officer, presents Sarah with a traditional Hmong textile that took months to create. It's a work of art that tells the story of their collaboration, with symbols representing healing, friendship, and the bonds that transcend cultural differences. "You taught us to heal with Western medicine," Chia says, tears streaming down her face. "But you also learned to heal with Hmong spirit. You will always be part of our family no matter where you go." Sarah wants to promise that she'll find a way to help, that she'll lobby Congress or work with refugee organizations or do something to protect the people she's leaving behind. But she knows that once she's gone, Lima Site 20A will disappear from official records, becoming another classified chapter in America's secret wars. The flight to Thailand takes 2 hours, but it feels like a journey to another universe. Sarah stares out the window at the mountains of Laos, knowing that she's leaving behind people who will likely be dead within months, victims of a war that officially never existed. Lima Site 20A is overrun by North Vietnamese forces 6 weeks after Sarah's evacuation. The hospital staff, following protocols she helped develop, destroy the medical equipment and scatter into the jungle. Some escape to refugee camps in Thailand, others disappear into the mountains to continue treating wounded Hmong fighters, and many are captured and executed as war criminals. Vang Pao survives the initial assault, but is captured 3 months later while trying to evacuate wounded civilians. She's tortured for information about American operations, then executed along with dozens of other Hmong collaborators. Her last words, according to survivors, are a prayer for the patients she couldn't save. Chia Vang makes it to a refugee camp in Thailand, where she continues to practice medicine under conditions that make Lima Site 20A look luxurious. She eventually immigrates to the United States, where she becomes a respected physician and advocate for Hmong refugees. But she never forgets the hospital in the mountains, or the American doctor who taught her that healing transcends politics and nationality. Sarah returns to the United States to find a country that has no interest in hearing about the secret war in Laos or the allies who were abandoned there. The medical establishment treats her experience as an interesting footnote. The government classifies her reports, and the media ignores a story that doesn't fit the narrative of American withdrawal from Southeast Asia. She spends the rest of her career working with refugee organizations, trying to help the Hmong families who managed to escape the genocide that followed America's abandonment. It's meaningful work, but it can't erase the guilt of survival, the knowledge that she lived while better people died, the understanding that she was complicit in a betrayal that cost thousands of lives. The lesson of Lima Site 20A isn't about the failure of American foreign policy, though that failure is undeniable. It's about the bonds that form between people who share the mission of healing, regardless of their nationality or politics. In the caves of northern Laos, American doctors and Hmong nurses created something beautiful, a hospital that combined the best of both cultures, a community that transcended the divisions that separate peoples, a testament to the power of healing to unite rather than divide. But it's also a story about the cost of abandonment, about what happens when political expedience trumps moral obligation, about the price paid by ordinary people for the strategic decisions made by distant leaders. The Hmong people who worked at Lima Site 20A weren't just allies. They were partners, colleagues, friends. They deserved better than abandonment, and their sacrifice deserves to be remembered. The secret war in Laos officially ended in 1975, but its consequences continue to this day. Thousands of Hmong refugees still live in camps in Thailand, stateless people who can't return home and aren't welcome anywhere else. The bombs dropped on Laos continue to kill and maim decades after the war ended, making it one of the most heavily contaminated countries on Earth. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Lima Site 20A is the proof that healing can transcend politics, that medical ethics can survive even in the darkest circumstances, that the bonds formed between healers are stronger than the forces that try to divide them. In a world that often seems consumed by hatred and division, that's a lesson worth remembering. Stories like this remind us that behind every classified operation, every strategic decision, every political calculation, there are human beings whose lives are forever changed by forces beyond their control. The secret war in Laos shows us both the best and worst of American involvement in Southeast Asia, the courage and dedication of individuals who risked everything to help others, and the callous abandonment of allies when they became politically inconvenient. That's what we explore here, the human cost of political decisions, the bonds that form between people in extreme circumstances, the price of loyalty, and the tragedy of abandonment. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to understand the real human impact of America's secret wars, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because there are so many more stories like this one, waiting to be told with the honesty and respect they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.